Hey, what's up? Rafael Cortez here with another episode of the CEO Pulse podcast, where you get the real, the raw, and the mind of entrepreneurship. We are sitting down with Steve Chaparrro. He's an organizational culture expert and a communicator who speaks worldwide about how companies can transform their workplace through intentional co-creation and the culture of the business, right? He's also the founder and principal at Culture Design Studio, and in the process of writing a book about the same topic. So the topic that we're about to hit on is, it's one of the things that it's often just kind of undermined when it comes to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, well, thank you, Rafael. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure.
So give us a little bit of background.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started off in the world of architecture. I went to school for architecture, got my 5-year degree there, and then went into the field. Mm-hmm. And so half of my career has been in the world of creative professionals, whether they be architects, whether they be designers, marketing, things like that. The other half of my career has been in the area of business and finance. So worked in real estate development all throughout the rise and fall of the housing industry in the early 2000s, and then was a financial advisor for about 3 years. So I would say that my interest, there's been a thread line that has been throughout all of it, but I would say it's at this nexus of business, design, and what I would call culture, organizational culture, the culture of one, things like that.
One of the things that we were talking about was the frustrated visionary.
What I started to realize at the last firm that I was at, that there were a lot of creative founders, creative principals, entrepreneurs, visionary leaders that were very charismatic. They had this gift of woo that they would attract people to them. There was a certain soul genius about them that launched a lot of their early success. But as they started to see some of that success begin to wane, they realized in some cases that their genius had somewhat of a shelf life. That in order to go to the next level, they were really going to have to harness the collective genius of their team. In many cases, these visionary leaders are very good communicators from the stage, charismatic leaders from the stage that people will want to be around them and talk to them and maybe even hire them. But they aren't necessarily the best communicators when they get pushback from their team. So it's like communicators from the stage is very different than being a communicator from across the table or one-on-one. And so what I started to see was this common problem that I see visionaries having is that when they share their vision or when they're leading this movement that they want to build, what happens when they meet resistance? People don't just, widely accept their idea at the beginning. If you've seen the innovation adoption curve, right? Yeah. It's like a bell curve, right? The first 2.5% of adoption are the innovators, then early adopters, and then so on and so forth. So what happens when you're trying to lead people who are at the end of that adoption curve and you're trying to get them to embrace your idea early in the innovation cycle? It's going to be hard, if not impossible. So I started to see some of those things in leaders that I was working with. But here's the thing. I realized that I wanted to help organizations transform their cultures, which led me to a deeper insight, and that was I also wanted to help the leaders at the organizations experience their own inner transformation. But the one thing I did not count on was that I was going to have to go under my own transformation. So this also comes from a lot of my own experience as a self-described frustrated visionary of learning how to deal with those challenges when your ideas are not initially accepted.
So it's what do you mean by internal transformation? I think I have a sense of it, but it's I think you come to a crossroad, right? It sounds like you come to a crossroad where you figure out, okay, here's a problem that's happening. This is the source of it, and I'm right in the middle of it. How do you branch out into what the solution that you found was, and what do you mean by triggering that internal?
Yeah. So this is sort of insight that I got in some cases from the most
Transformation.
common sense or even just wisdom in life lessons that you learn. When I started to have children, my father-in-law told me, he says, Steve, whenever I've wanted my kids to change, I needed to change first. So that's the basic principle that I'm bringing to bear, is that if leaders want their organizations to change, if they want people to embrace their idea and actually do something different, then the leader must look at themselves internally and say, this change begins with one. That begins with me. Mm-hmm. What are some things that I need to do differently? How do I need to show up differently? Because, whatever generation you may represent or I represent or your listeners represent, there's a younger group that's coming in who think very differently.
Oh, yeah.
And so historically, we have had, as you know, in organizational psychology, you've probably dealt with that there are different ways that the organizations are designed. Historically, it's been a top-down command and control type of structure. Yep. Well, with the young cats coming in, they're not going to tolerate that. They're not going to tolerate that. They're going to expect a different type of leadership. And the incumbent leader, that visionary who's been there for a while, who's founded the company, they're going to say, why do I have to change? This is my company. This is my vision. You need to change to what I'm telling you. And these folks are saying either they're going to speak up with their lips or they're going to speak up with their feet, and they're going to take off because they're not going to tolerate that. So I think any change needs to begin with the leader first before you can start embodying or actually asking people to make that change themselves.
I love where you're headed with this. So how do you feel like you can kind of draw the line between what's acceptable in terms of how much a visionary is willing to change for the sake of the team? Are you talking complete overhaul of systems? Are you talking complete overhaul of industries?
So sometimes ultimately that's what happens over a period of years. Mm-hmm. But I think from my world and background in design thinking, we don't necessarily suggest that the intention to be an absolute overhaul from the beginning. Because if you are going to preach a massive overhaul transformation to your people are going to get overwhelmed. They're not going to be able to see it. They're not going to say, you know what, I didn't sign up for this. I'm out. Yeah. So the idea is paint a picture of what you want as a desired outcome, but then what's the next best step that you can take? So in the world of design thinking or lean startups, they talk about minimal viable product. What's your next MVP. Best step that you can take so that you can get a quick win? People understand the benefits and even the purpose behind this change, and then kind of expand the aperture a little bit, or the circumference of what we're willing to look at. And then just through a process of iteration, collaboration, and small wins, you can begin to expand. So I think for me, this is a model that looks more similar to a movement than to a mandate.
Okay. I like that. There's a huge difference, right, between a mandate and a movement. A mandate, it's authoritarian. You're doing this, and that's it. Why? Because I said so. Right. And a movement, everybody has buy-in into what's happening. Okay, so this is kind of like coming in and transforming, right? So shifting something that's already in place. What about the frustrated visionary who's trying to take off, who's trying to launch a business, or maybe just set up a foundation for what they want to do? Yeah.
So I think when they have an idea, when they have a vision, mm-hmm. maybe it's a change they want to create in the world. They want to create a movement. I think early on, it's important for them to act as an architect of that vision. And mm-hmm. when I mean by that, I mean, obviously coming from my background in architecture, it's being able to not only envision what that looks like, but it's your ability to articulate the purpose of this, the benefits of that, and then what it's going to take. So I think early on, having somewhat of a prescribed picture of what that looks like is necessary so that people will have clarity and come on board. However, as you start to have a little bit of maturity in your company, then you need to be less of an architect and more of a facilitator of vision. And that is bringing people into the process so that they can contribute to what I call the flesh and skin of what that vision is going to look like. So I kind of use this terminology of the spirit, the bones, and the flesh of a movement. The visionary, with their words and with their actions, can breathe life and say, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. This is the direction we're going to go. It may not describe a finite destination, but here's where we want to go. I need you folks to come and help me to establish what are the bones of this, or the structure. But more than that, I want you to help me determine what is the flesh of this, meaning what will this look like? Because I think many times, as you know, in your organizational psychology, is employee engagement is not really good, and they're not feeling ownership. They're not giving discretionary effort. But when you invite them to say, hey, I believe in the genius that you bring to the table. I want to harness the collaborative genius of our organization. I believe that you have better insights being on the front lines than I do from the ivory tower. So what can we do to work on this together? But that takes a lot of vulnerability. Yeah. It takes a lot of courage for a leader to say, I may not have the best ideas.
And, yeah, absolutely. And man, that's so on the money. I think that school of thought it's slowly becoming less and less effective. And I think you're completely right about the new generations coming in. There's I think the construct of entitlement, right? It's thrown around left and right, but I don't think that's the only thing that's happening. I think it's not to say that everybody or the newer, younger generations are just, feeling entitled about everything, but I think there's a desire for higher meaning, and I think I think that plays into it, and it can be misconstrued as entitlement, but I think it's just a desire to belong, right? It's a desire to make an impact. Yeah, and I think we're phasing into a stage where, as through collective consciousness, I think we're phasing into a stage where feeling like you matter and what you're doing matters. It's almost as important, if not more, than the amount of money that you're getting out of a job.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've thought about this long and hard, and I think that there are 3 different types of fears that a visionary may feel at different stages in their life. I think early career, there is this fear of insignificance, and that's what you're speaking of. Is right. Yeah. I want to matter. I want to make a difference in the world, and if I'm not given an opportunity to make a difference, then I'm not feeling right. I think mid-career, it sometimes looks like a fear of invisibility. Like, I'm 20 years into my career. Have I made an impact? Like, have I shown up? Do people? Yeah. Have people noticed? And then late career, I think it's a fear of irrelevance, especially for those that have been those visionary leaders who have 30, 40 years under the belt, and they've got 1, 2, 3 generations coming up behind them. And these generations are saying, hey, you need to show up different.
Do I still matter? Yeah.
Do I still matter? If I need to show up different, like, do I still have the goods? Like, I've had people tell me that are in their late 50s that they see that the way that the business is requiring them to change as a leader, like, do I have the energy, or do I just need to retire?
Yeah.
At 60 years old, because they're faced with the fact of they have to reinvent themselves. Now, it's not changing who they are, but it's changing how they show up.
Yeah, absolutely. The approach, and then also the degree of control they may or may not have over the business, and ultimately how you're treating the human capital that's taking place in your organization, I think, falls into. So you said something, you've said a lot of important things, but I think one that just keeps popping up: how do you deal with that question? Like, do I still matter? Is what I'm doing, still relevant? Doesn't matter. How do you approach that? I mean, that's a big thing to ask when you're 40 years into your industry.
So I'll give you an example of like a story for myself. So I was at a company and I was on the executive leadership team, and I literally thought that the way things were going, because of the things that I felt I brought to the table, that I was going to get tapped as the new CEO of the company. So that's how strongly I felt. I got laid off. I got laid off from the company. So you talk about questioning everything about myself. What did I bring to the table? Did they appreciate it? Did I make an impact? Whatever thoughts I had. And so I'll be honest, I wanted to respond in a sort of retaliatory way through legal means, or at least just by writing a letter or voicing my complaints and my thesis as to why they were wrong.
Significance again, right?
Yeah, for sure. And then I had a friend that we sat down for coffee, and I was expecting him to affirm my desires, to, kind of respond back. And he said, Steve, this is actually something that seems to be somewhat of a pattern with you, in that you feel you have better ideas than those that you're serving under, if you're not the top guy. So maybe you need to work on yourself rather than trying to fix the company you were just at. And I tell you what, that advice left me sick to my stomach, because I knew that he was right. And so what I did then was I reached out to 10 family and friends, and I sent them a list of 5 questions. Like, what are the top 3 things that I'm good at? What's the one thing that I really need to work on? What's the one strength that I take for granted? What's the one moment or memory that we shared that most resonates with you, and so on. And it took courage to ask those questions. Yeah. It took vulnerability for me to accept those answers, because the affirmations were resonant between everyone. But so were the constructive criticism. I was told, Steve, you have a passion to fire people up, but you also it can also burn people out. Like, you are really smart, you are able to connect and articulate very disparate ideas, but you can be condescending to those who don't quite catch on as fast as you do. So for me, to answer your question, it's about digging deep and going beyond yourself to ask other people questions to give you insight to what you referenced earlier, to give you exposure as to what are your blind spots. So emotional intelligence is about having self-awareness, but being able to have self-management. It's also about social awareness and being able to manage those relationships. So all 4 of those together bring about some emotional intelligence that will prepare you to embark on this journey of internal transformation, so you can learn in order to lead. So for me, it's about self-awareness is the foundation of all of that, and recognizing what are the areas that I lack. And it's those shadows that we talked about earlier. It's like, for every bright light that you represent or bring to the table because of your genius, that bright light will cast a shadow. Like, I was a really good communicator from the stage, but when I was met with resistance one-on-one, I wasn't a good communicator. And so all of those things began to be exposed as I went deep and went into my cave, as I call it, to really, have some introspection.
I had something similar happen to me in terms of, and one of the words that keeps popping up for me over the last couple of weeks is awareness. Yeah. It's interesting that you bring it up right now. But it is, if you don't have awareness, you can't know what's, you can't look into any issues, solve any, you don't have a starting point, right? It all becomes real, or it becomes something with awareness, through awareness. Yeah. That's, step number 1. Now, I love the fact that you did a personal inventory on you through your family. Mm-hmm. I mean, that does take guts to, be there, especially if you have that sense of like your friend was describing, right? If you have that sense of feeling like you have things under control, and you're usually at the at the management side of things and the leadership role, it's hard to set yourself in a vulnerable position like that. However, I think it's needed because it brings in a different, perspective, different, point of awareness. Right. One thing that happened to me a while back was, and I was not aware of it until problems developed, was that you're right. I mean, I was good at the public side of things. Having conversations, engaging in new relationships and building that out. And then when it came down to me and being a leader within my companies, my default thought, it's common sense. They already know it. And I would not take the time to just really explain things. Even the vision itself, like it was murky, it was foggy. Like I knew what it looked like. It was crystal clear in my head.
Yeah, exactly.
I was not conveying that to anybody in my team.
Yeah. And it's not your team's fault. And that's one of the things that I write about is like generally when we do get that feedback initially, our default response is that it's their fault. And let's just be honest, because if your audiences are entrepreneurs, they're probably all type A overachievers, right? And let's just be honest. Some of the thoughts that go through our head are they just don't get it. They're narrow-minded. They're the status quo. It's their fault that they don't understand, and we place all the blame on them. But I learned as a teacher. There's this one phrase. It's not grammatically correct, but it says it's not what's taught, it's what's caught that's most important. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about communication, the entire burden is on the communicator, not the audience, to deliver a clear message. The audience is always right. If your message was not clear to them, then it's my fault, or it's our fault as the communicator. So I think that was definitely something that I've had to learn, about. Yeah, it's definitely crystal clear, but I say when it escapes our lips, it goes like, oh my gosh, it went into the mist. Like no one catches it. Like I don't understand. Like it sounded great in my head.
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Everything looks, so lined up and it's linear and it's just common sense and it's in there, right? But we start speaking about it and it just like there's a lot of gaps. That's one thing that I think has to be understood by leaders and CEOs and entrepreneurs and visionaries, right? It's not everybody has the same perspective that you have or, that I have in business. Now, another thing that happened to me was that, I was speaking and I was putting, content out there and talking about the stuff that was going on in my head. So I automatically assumed that my whole team was just keeping tabs on it. Like I've talked about that on here or on that part. Like they don't care, they don't know what's happening. If you don't tell them, if you don't bring that conversation home, it's not like people more than likely going to miss all that stuff.
Right. I mean, I think that deals with a couple of things. I think number one, we actually need to communicate. We can't assume that they're going to learn by osmosis or by the Ethernet. They're not content junkies like we are about this stuff. They're not going to be searching everything that we put out. It's like, oh yeah, everyone's going to just retweet or repost what we put up. Half of them, if not more, don't even look at the stuff. Let's just be honest. I mean, we think that it's a lot better. Not to say that it's not good, but we tend to have a higher opinion of the value of that content for their lives than they do. So I think so that's one thing. Number one, we actually have to communicate. We can't just rely on them picking it up on their own. However, two, I think with regard to communication is we need to let them wrestle with the message. And so what I say is I remember there was a young leader that I was mentoring and he had just shared his vision with his team. And he says, I just don't understand. Why aren't they just like jumping, hooting and hollering and wanting to just embrace this vision? I'm getting pushback. And I asked him, have you taken the time to sit down with them individually to hear them out and hear what misunderstandings or let them push back? And he's like, why would I do that? They should just fall in line. And that idea of wrestling with the message is sometimes people need to verbally process things. So that to an insecure leader, that will come off as rebellion.
Yeah.
But to a secure leader, that comes off as they're processing. I remember I used to teach junior high kids, and I remember that some of them would mock what was being taught. And what I said to some of my peers is, you know what? I love that the fact, okay, maybe they're being disrespectful, maybe they are mocking, but guess what? They're listening.
Yeah.
The only way you can mock is if you listen.
You pay attention.
So that was step one. So the fact that they wrestled with the idea, and sometimes you give them that space and time to just process it with you, and they're like, "Oh, Steve, thanks so much. Like you made it." And like, I didn't do anything. I just gave you space. But the third thing is, sometimes it will let me know how can I communicate this thing differently. Mm-hmm. To your point, like I think sometimes we think it comes out so crystal clear, and I think there's so many things about communication that we can learn that will only help us.
So yeah, thank you for that. So the visionary, the frustrated visionary, like the whole what's the premise of, what's the background? I mean, if you were to pinpoint like the criteria for a frustrated visionary, what does that look like?
Yeah, so it's a visionary whose passion turns to frustration mm-hmm. when their ideas meet resistance. Okay, so these are visionary leaders, as you described them, see very clearly what the future looks like, not just how it could look, but there's an imperative part of this. This is how it should look like. Like, there's all kinds of reasons. If you don't accept this preferred future, then something bad is going to happen. So there's that imperative aspect to it. And so when you're sharing that, when you're having this vision of either for your company, a product or a service or of your culture, and you communicate it and you get resistance. Either you get people giving you side eye, or people speaking up, or people back channeling and not just embracing it. And so when you're pushing, trying to drive that message forward, because that's what type A people do. We drive forward. We push and push. And when we get resistance, that turns to frustration. And many times that will look like we can be condescending. We can be arrogant. We can be toxic. The ego kicks in. And the ego is the shadow side of us, right? We can start to resort to other things, lashing out at people, publicly humiliating people, and it's all misplaced anger. It's really not even about that person. It's just that collectively I'm stuck. I'm not able to move this thing forward, and it's all their fault. It's all their fault. They're just, and it's like, well, what's the commonality between all of those 50 conversations? It's you. And so when you're frustrated, you're not able to move forward. You're not able to control the narrative. And things like that. So I think there was a CEO study that was done, and it said that the top 4 negative emotions that a CEO faces is 1, frustration, 2, irritation, 3, discouragement, and 4, overwhelm. So all of those things together contribute to what I call a frustrated visionary.
Check.
Yeah. Right?
Right. Yeah, no, I love the concept, and I love the fact that you're shedding light on this. I mean, you're in the process of writing a book, and it feels like, I mean, you have this it's not a theory. It goes beyond that, but it's a vision driven culture, right? Prevents the burnout. Basically. Yeah. So if somebody's trying, if we have somebody, like, for example, for the audience, to simplify things a little bit, if you have, if you're trying to create or build that vision driven culture, can you give us, I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe pointers that can like set us off in the right direction?
Yeah. So a vision driven culture, I think, one, there has to be, in culture itself, there needs to be psychological safety. It's been written about so many, everyone is writing about it. It's a space where people feel empowered to speak their minds, to voice questions, to voice pushback without the fear of any sort of retaliation. That's so important. And many times leaders, the visionary leaders, are so bigger than life that people are intimidated to speak up. And so I think being able to develop a culture of psychological safety is so important. I think being able to establish your skills as a communicator is extremely important, whether it's how you speak to people one-on-one or one-to-many, whether it's how you write. And it's also your nonverbal communication. Sometimes I catch myself on Zoom making a disgruntled face, and I'm like, Steve, did you really think no one saw that? Everyone saw it. Your body language when you come and move. So communication comes in its many forms. I also think with regards to creativity, coming up with ideas, as we mentioned before, realizing that there's going to be greater innovation that happens in your company when you invite people to be part of the creative process. And that's co-creation is where it comes from, design thinking world and things like that. So I think that's another important aspect. And having empathy, which comes from that awareness, that social awareness, being having your ear to the pulse of what's going on. You may not have naturally the gift or the skill of social awareness, but being able to ask people for their opinions and really try to see where they're coming from so that you could respond accordingly, so that you can communicate accordingly. I think those are several issues that can really enhance developing that vision-driven culture, but also inviting them into the visioning process. Saying, I'm not the only one that owns vision. Yes, I'm the chief visionary officer, but that will only be enhanced if I invite you into that process as well.
Yeah, in my experience, I've had some of the greatest improvements and moments of just innovation have happened because I've brought people who are in the front lines. I brought them into the management, quote unquote, management meetings or the brainstorming meetings. Okay, what are you thinking about this? How can we structure this? How can we, I don't know, gear a new marketing campaign? But when you're it's hard to see everything just from the big seat at the back of the room. You know what I mean? As when you're just monitoring and trying to control everything. And have that one path, that one vision, I think you're missing out on a lot of the talent that you could be capitalizing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a lesson that I learned even going back to my architecture school days, where they told us never begin a design project with the end design already figured out. They literally taught us, take a blank, this is when we manually drafted. They were teaching us manual drafting. So take your blank sheet of vellum paper, and you draw one line. That line is going to inspire the next line, which will inspire the next line. So the process of design is a process of discovery. So that as you invite more lines to the table, more voices to the table, what will emerge from that process will be far greater than what you could have ever preconceived. And so that idea of co-creativity and an emergent innovation is so powerful. And I think if leaders can really harness that, it's going to blow their mind as to the innovation capability within their teams.
I love it, man. I have this theory when it comes to business development. I think reverse engineering it's one of the best ways of crafting, the processes and the systems, right? When it comes to the pragmatic stuff. But for culture, I think you have to be forward thinking, which is exactly what you just laid out. So, I mean, it's a combination of the two, right? But when you're talking about, soft skills, having the social awareness, a lot of times we feel like that person does not have social awareness, does not have, they suck at this, it's not, their best, talent or whatnot. But I think there's things that can be just kind of set in place. Even if you're not the best communicator out there, there's still things that you can work on to become better at it. Not necessarily the most, charismatic, however, convey the information in a way that's gonna, it's gonna matter, right?
Well, there's a term in football that I just learned about. I'm not even sure if I'm quoting it right, but I heard it's like the term of a pullback coach. And it's the idea that coaches on the sideline can't encroach onto the field, or other players can't encroach onto the field. They need to be, in a sense, pulled back so that they don't get a penalty. Yeah. So, the Rams coach, I'm from LA, but I don't even know the Rams coach's name. He has a guy that literally stands 12 inches away from him and is constantly pulling him back because he doesn't have his own personal wherewithal, awareness to realize he's even on the field. And I think sometimes we need pullback leaders for us as entrepreneurs, as visionaries, is even if we don't have that skill within ourselves, like social awareness, we can surround ourselves with a person or two or more who become those pullback leaders who alert us, hey, come back, or hey, you did this, and have the vulnerability to be able to accept that. Because could you imagine if a coach turned around and punched his pullback coach for pulling him off the... No, like he hired him for that specific reason. And I think we need to have people in our lives that can supplement where we're not at, and we can't just use the excuse, I don't think that way, I don't have that skill. That's not acceptable. Yeah,
I think we're well beyond those times. It's the degree of information development and competitiveness out there. Like you have to adapt, you have to improve at a personal level, and which includes everything from social awareness, from skills, from soft skills to hard skills, and everything in between, right? It's just a matter of you have to do it, otherwise you sink and die. Like there's no other way to work around like the ever changing times that happen right now, just socially. So I love it, man. One question it's my favorite question. If you were walking down the street and you ran into the 17-year-old Steve Chaparrro, what would you tell that kid?
Oh man, 17-year-old kid. I've actually thought about this. Not so much 17, but probably 15-year-old kid. And the 15-year-old kid in me, I would tell him, stick to your guns, pursue your passions. Don't be swayed by what culture tells you. Don't be swayed by what your peers are doing. Be true to your purpose. Be true to your passions and pursue it. It's going to be a lot of hard work. You're going to have to undergo some painful transformation. And maybe in retrospect, you need to go through the ups and downs of sometimes, I listened to that person, or I let culture tell me what I should be. I pursued it. And then I realized 20 years later that what I thought at 15 was actually the right thing. Yeah. Because, that's my story. My story is at 15, I had a really good sense of where I wanted to go. At 25, I had made some aspirational decisions, which I don't regret because that's part of my story. At 35, I said, you know what? I've been there, done that, and I'm not fulfilled. There's got to be something deeper. 10 years later, I've realized I'm back to square one at what I thought at 15, and I'm actually very happy.
You found that kid again.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I love it, man. The reason I put a 17, tag on it, it's because that was me at 17. Yeah. I owned the world. I knew where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. I had that, spark, that life. And then you get tasky. You get, hit with the human side of things, right? Yeah. And the reality of life, and start forgetting, kind of like that light has a tendency to start dimming, when responsibility and reality hits. And finding it can be a challenge, but once you find it again, or sometimes we get distracted by the shiny things in life, right?
Exactly. We start making money, we start getting success, and we think that that's where it's at, and we realize after a while that that is not where it's at.
Right.
But we almost needed to go through that to have that understanding.
Yeah. Man, I love it. Thank you so much, Steve. If somebody wants to get a hold of you, and I know you're in the process of writing out a book, so people can, once it's published, they can go to it and then just dive deep into the concept of frustrated visionaries and really understanding that. I think it's a jewel, right, for any entrepreneur out there. If somebody wants to reach out to you or connect with you, what's the best way to do it? Yeah,
so I've got two ways. One, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And mention to me if we connect that you heard me on CEO Pulse. That'll make me accept the connection right away. The second thing is I do have a free 5-day audio course based on this topic of frustrated visionaries, turning their frustrations into foundations for change. And so it's a daily email that is sent over 5 days with an audio lesson each day and some accompanying homework that they can go through as they sort of think through some of the lessons that they hear. So that's a great way to be introduced to some of the thoughts that I bring to the table, and ultimately that will be the topic of the book moving forward.
How do they get that?
So they go to stevechaparro.co/frustrated, and we have a landing page there that they can just enter their email, and they'll automatically receive those emails over a 5-day period.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thank you so much. I appreciate you stopping by. It's golden nuggets, really. I think there's not enough awareness on the topic yet. I think we tend to get caught up in the taskiness of things and the pragmatic side of business, and often forget, as CEOs, as owners, as visionaries, we often forget that, you know, the 80% of the game is really in that mental state, right? And knowing how to cope with it, at least from our standpoint of a leadership position. So. Right. Yeah, thank you so much. It's been a blast, man.